Good afternoon, everyone. This is Alan Murabayashi from PhotoShelter speaking to you with another edition of What Photo Buyers Want. We are very, very pleased to have Elizabeth Krist, who is a senior photo editor from National Geographic, joining us today for an hour's worth of learning about how photos are used and created in the magazine and how they deal with their photographers. For those of you who are joining us or have to leave early, we are recording this webinar and it will be available to you probably tomorrow morning. So if you have to leave early, just make sure you log back into our blog and it should be there. Or I believe we also email people as well. But with that, Elizabeth, welcome.
Hi, Alan. Thanks so much. Hi, everybody.
Now, we were chatting before, and you do have a little bit of a cold, so there might be some coughing breaks during the presentation.
Sorry, everybody. Right, right.
Well, let's step right into it. Give us a little background on where you came from and how you got into the photo editing business.
Well, I was an English major in school, and I always thought that I would go into publishing on the text end, editing fiction or poetry. And then I ended up getting a summer job when I graduated from college, and it was helping an educational company with their photography. So I did some stock research, and I also assisted a photographer in casting all my friends in the shoot, which was really fun, and also helping him, with some of the sets and with, sort of pulling together the shoots. So that's how I got into it, just totally by accident.
And that led into kind of a lifetime of work in magazines.
Yes, I ended up actually at the Asia Society after I was traveling in Europe with my husband Gary Krist, who's actually a writer. And when I came back from Europe, I found a job at the Asia Society. And at the time, they had a four-color consumer magazine. And it was funny because it was a tiny little magazine. There were only five women actually on the staff at the time, which was really fun. And I ended up meeting a lot of the photographers that I still know, people like Lynn Johnson and Steve McCurry, uh, Mike Yamashita. It's just ironic, but it was just funny that I happened to come into contact with some of those people very early on. And then I went on to Fortune magazine, and Alice Rose George hired me. And I was lucky enough to work for her, and then with Michelle McNally there. And then I came to Geographic in 1994.
You know, the last two bullet points, you're pretty active in photography, obviously outside of your job,
Mhm.
jurying contests, attending portfolio reviews. Can you kind of give us a sense of why that's important to you and what you think it means for photographers?
Well, I absolutely love to get out of this cocoon that we have here because National Geographic can be really all-encompassing, and it's so easy just to live your entire life within these four walls and have a very rich visual life. But I want to try to go beyond that because for instance, I love going to galleries and museums, and I love meeting many of my colleagues, when I go either for judgings or to review portfolios or going to photo festivals. And so it means a lot to me to be able to sort of see other perspectives and also to see other kinds of work. And I find that it's really energizing for me and inspiring for me to see all levels of work, whether it's student work or professional work, and to be able to sort of learn from that and to try to give back whatever I can and to just find that kind of stimulation and seeing a real variety of work I find really important.
Yeah. Um, so the magazine, take us through the different sections of each issue and also tell us, obviously you are commissioning pieces, but does the magazine also use pickup, aka stock photography? And if so, where does that come from?
Yes, it's good that we're talking about this because I think your audience might be interested in trying to submit for some of our departments. For the feature well, which is the central section of the magazine, which is primarily our longer length stories, we almost always assign everything. It's almost always commissioned. Every once in a while, we'll pick up an existing package, but that's very unusual. And so what happens is in the front of the book, we have both visions and your shot in which anyone is invited to submit, essentially. And it turns out that most of the work that's published in Visions, I would say, probably comes from professionals, whereas your shot is primarily, non-professionals. And so, as promised, I will try to give some tips to your listeners so that they might have a little bit of an advantage in submitting. With visions, the bottom line is that we need color, we need them to be horizontal, and we need the frames to be able to gutter straight down the middle. And I spoke to Sherry Bruckbacher, who is the photo editor who's primarily responsible for going through the first wave of submissions. And she works very closely with Sarah Lean, who's the sort of supervising editor on the section. And Sherry told me that she is looking through hundreds of thumbnails at a time. And so it's a striking composition that first catches her attention. And then on top of that, what she's looking for is really unusual subject matter, something that's a real revelation in terms of revealing something to our readership. And also, how should I put it? Of course, you're looking for beautiful light. But she said one thing that's really difficult to get and they don't have enough of are those really human moments, something with real emotion, something that's touching or uplifting or very dramatic. So that would give you a real advantage because so often the pictures that are considered for that section are aerials or they have some kind of very unusual perspective. So to be able to come in with something that has some kind of intimacy, I think would give you a real advantage there. And anyone is welcome to submit to, you can actually just email Sherry directly. It's visions@ngs.org. So that's visions with an S at ngs.org, and you will automatically get a response which gives you instructions on exactly how to submit. So that's the deal with Visions. And those are the three double trucks that run at the beginning of the editorial content in every issue. And then that's usually followed in the departments by Your Shot, which is the department in which we invite all of our readers to submit. And for that, I spoke to Jean Moderman, who's the editor who is in charge of that section, and she again said that she will wade through hundreds of images usually every day. But one tip she gave me is that when she comes in on the Monday morning, there will often be 500 images that pile up over a weekend, whereas if she comes in like Tuesday through Friday, there are only about 150. So you're going to improve your odds if you don't submit over the weekend. So that's one thing I wanted to tell everybody.
It's
And
funny,
the
we
other
hear
thing
that
that,
so often
mhm.
actually. Like don't
Oh,
contact a
really?
photo
Oh, I
editor
didn't
on
realize
Monday
that.
because they're nuts
Mhm.
on Monday.
Right, right. And so then also she advised the submitters never to watermark your images because she will just automatically dismiss that because they don't do anything with the image. As soon as they get it, she's in very early every morning. She makes a selection of the daily dozen, the 12 that she feels are qualified, and she'll submit it and they get posted immediately. And of course, no Photoshop manipulation is allowed, but of course that's true of Visions also or of any image in the magazine. If we do something in the magazine that's at all technically, how should I put it, contrived in some way, like sometimes we might stitch two images together or something. We're always very transparent about that in the caption. But for these submission things, you can never have any manipulation. However, she did say that in Your Shot, people are allowed to be a little more creative in terms of setting up things. If it's very obvious that it's like, I think there was something recent in one of the departments in which there were two matchsticks that were set on fire and sort of posed to look like they were two people or something, so you can make these little vignettes or something. And she's looking for that any kind of creativity or just a really unique way of seeing something. And she also said that it helps if you keyword things because sometimes they'll suddenly decide that they want to have a theme for the day. And if you have a keyword, then they'll be able to pull that in. She also said that I asked her, are there any subjects you're absolutely sick of seeing and people should try to avoid sending in? She said, immediately her response was peacocks. She said she's sick of seeing peacocks. She never wants to see another peacock. She said also she gets a lot of hummingbirds and a lot of frogs. So if we can avoid those. But something you should be aware of if you're interested in submitting to your shot, which is that if your image is chosen, we then own all the rights. And so, you know, you would not be able to, we would not compensate you for publishing the image at all. So that's something that, we would have all rights to that for any other National Geographic products. So people should be aware of that.
Right,
Mhm.
right.
Okay, so, and then the last two departments in the back of the book are not departments where people can submit. Those are things that we deal with. The moment is something related to our photographers on assignment, and it's very related to Field Test, which is a digital-only feature that's on the web and on iPad, and which people should check out because Field Test for many weeks now has been following the Everest expedition, but just I think yesterday they started with a whole new photo of the day feature. And so if you Google Field Test National Geographic, it'll be interesting to start seeing what kinds of things they're featuring in that department. And then Flashback is all historical, and it's usually some image from our archive that ties into some current story that's in the issue that we have now.
There have been some
So
amazing
that's
photos I've seen from the Everest expedition, and in fact, on our blog yesterday, we did a bunch of images from photographers who are Instagramming off of Everest right now.
oh, that's
Yeah,
great.
it's
Yeah,
really
that's
interesting.
wonderful.
So
Yeah,
take us
that's really
through
wonderful.
here some photo stories that you enjoy. This one by Chi Chang.
Sure. It was so difficult to have to select only, I forget what it is, 6 stories or something to feature during the session because there have been so many. I've been here 17 years, and it's really hard to choose, but I have to say that this story has a particular place in my heart because I worked with the writer Tom O'Neill on trying to develop this story, and Tom had access to a particular group of missionaries who were helping defectors escape from North Korea and helping sort of smuggle them basically through China, Laos, and Thailand to go back through South Korea, where they could actually start building a new life, which in some cases was very, very difficult for them. They didn't know what to do with their freedom. They never had to function kind of with that kind of autonomy themselves. And so when I was discussing with David Griffin, who was the photo director at the time, photographers, I instantly thought of Chenchi, who had not shot for us for many, many years, but he seemed like a perfect choice because whichever photographer we were going to choose had to stay very low profile. I mean, because they were basically going to have to stay under the radar, and I was worried about our presence jeopardizing the refugees' status because if they were caught, they could be detained, and in some cases, some of the countries would have actually returned them to North Korea, which is almost equivalent to a death sentence. So we were very, very, sort of terrified about the repercussions of this. But Chen Shi, because he's Taiwanese, he speaks fluent Chinese. He's in mainland China quite a lot, and he's very, very quiet and self-effacing, and he really wins people's trust. And I just felt like he would be a perfect person for the story, and I do feel like I was, proven right in this case. So, and the reason that I love this picture, which was the opener in the story, was it gave me a sense of the kind of furtive nature of the refugees' lives. That they're This is actually a missionary reflected in a rearview mirror. He's waiting inside a car for one of the refugees to come out of one of these bars, one of these like karaoke bars where she was working. And so he was kind of waiting for her. And there's just always throughout this story two different motifs. One, the sense of watching and waiting, and the other, the sense of moving, like constantly being on the move. And I felt like both of those were really captured by
Hmm.
this image, which is one reason that I really loved it.
Did this run as a double truck as the opener?
Right, right. This one started the whole story as a double spread. Uh-huh.
Gotcha. And then this other train image that you have here, part of the same story.
Right, right. Because once they reached, once they snuck across the border into China, then they had to work their way down to the Beijing train station, and then they took the train down, into southern part of China where they would cross into Laos. And so what I loved about this was, of course, it was purely Chen Shi's his fertile mind, that saw this image where the billboard with the eyes is
Hmm.
reflected in the glass. So he's actually standing behind a window, and behind him is this ad with the eyes, and it's reflected in the window that's right in front of him. And if you look really carefully, you can see his head actually reflected right at the point where all of those,
The lines converge.
sort of,
Yeah.
yeah, vortices sort of converge in the ceiling. And so again, I love that feeling. You're on the move and you're being watched. It was like eyes everywhere. And again, if they had been caught at this point, they would all have been deported, so it would have been disaster.
So what's that, the eyes and the watching and the motion when you saw his entire edit, which was tens of thousands of images, was that something that
Hmm.
was consistent and persistent in the images?
The whole idea of movement was consistent throughout the coverage because they were constantly on the move and in hiding, and one of the things that was really really difficult also was that for almost all of the trip and for almost all of the defectors, he could not show their faces. And so
Yeah.
when you look at the story, you see almost every picture, people's faces are partially hidden or turned away or completely, facing away. It was really, really difficult, both for his shooting and for the editing. But I have to say, it really kind of lent also to that atmosphere of fear and tension. And it worked out well because he really managed to pull it off.
So to go back to some of more businessy and less photographic things, we have a bunch of questions in regards to ownership of images. In this case, Chenshi has the copyright, and you have commissioned him to produce the work, and perhaps there's an embargo on the story. Is that typically the case?
Yes, that's right. With almost every story, what happens is that we commission the photographer to go into the field for, X number of
Oops,
weeks, and
Elizabeth.
then,
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. We're getting that weird audio
sure.
flicker. You might
Okay,
want
do
to.
you
Do you
want me
want to try
to
to
log
unplug and?
out and log back?
Let's
Yeah,
try
yeah, sure.
unplugging and plug back in.
Okay, I'll go ahead. I'll do that right now.
So, for the audience, I know there's a lot of questions in regards to the rights grab. Like, is it a copyrights grab? So, I'm fairly certain what the magazine is doing for user submitted content, although we'll get clarification from Elizabeth if she in fact knows the answer, is that it's not a copyright grab, an assignment of ownership. What it is when you submit it, the magazine has the ability to say, if we select this image, we can use it online in the
Hi,
magazine,
Ellen,
etc.
I'm back.
It's still kind of bad.
Oh, is it? Is it? Well, I hate to say it. I don't know if it's any better.
Do you want to
So,
try logging out and logging back in again?
yeah, I'll check one more time.
Okay.
So,
Um, so that unfortunately is pretty typical in the publishing industry, um, and also in photo contests as well. A lot of the user the non-professional contests like the Smithsonian Magazine, for example, has a user submitted photography contest, and they also do the same thing where they're not taking copyright ownership, but they are saying we can use it for whatever we want, whether it's to advertise the contest, advertise the magazine, sell it in the bookstore, etc. So you do have to watch out when you are submitting images to these various publications, particularly when the submission process is designed for non-professionals.
Alan, I'm
Yes,
back, but how's my sound level now?
that sounds much better now.
Okay, okay, great.
So
So,
the question that I was sort of posing for the audience is in regards
mm-hmm,
to the user generated stuff, Envisions and your
mm-hmm.
shot. I guess people are getting tripped up. You're not taking their copyright. You're just saying we can use it for any National Geographic property. Is that correct?
Yes, you're correct. I misspoke. We're not taking their copyright. They still have the copyright. It's just that they're actually sort of ceding to us the right to be able to use it in our products. You're
Hmm.
absolutely correct. And in fact, one other thing I could mention is that if the person chooses, if the submitter chooses, he or she can actually have our image collection represent that image. And then if they were to be able to sell it, they would then divide the proceeds with the author of the image.
Gotcha. And
So
in terms of those two user submitted mechanisms, are any of those compensated?
Visions is compensated, but your shot is not.
Okay.
Visions is actually paid even at a slightly higher rate than our usual page rate, is my understanding.
Huh.
So believe it or not, yeah.
So that's
So
kind of the way for a non-commissioned photographer to get work published in the magazine while being
that's
compensated.
correct.
Okay.
That's correct, exactly. Uh-huh. Right. So.
The next slide here, photography that makes your jaw drop. Of course, we've seen a lot of great photography in the magazine over the decades.
Mhm.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about what what makes images stand out to you when you're looking at so many images, and how many images does the average photo editor look at in the course of a day or a week?
That varies so much depending on what phase of a story you're in, but I might have 15 to 20 stories that I'm carrying at a time. So I'm juggling a lot of things, and we are very autonomous, in terms of scheduling, projections for our editor, in terms of scheduling, time to write proposals, in terms of scheduling, when we work in layout, that sort of thing. Because we're very, very fortunate here in that we work on a story from generating proposals all the way through, sort of pitching it to the editors, to mapping out the whole shape of the story, to doing all the research with the photographer, to, being their contact and helping them set up stuff in the field, to editing everything, to then bringing in the photographer to edit together here at headquarters. And then the photographer presents the coverage to the editors, and then we all work in layout together as well. And then we're working with the researchers on checking everything. We're providing all of the raw caption information for our writers. It's really everything from beginning to end. And then, as you mentioned earlier, we're working with a lot of the online components too, with the web galleries and with the iPad ads, the options and the additions. So we work with all of that basically. Good. And also, Ellen, if you don't mind, this is where I think it might be a good time to mention that I'm one of about 10 photo editors, and there are so many of us. We all work with Kurt Muchler, who's our executive editor for photography, and he heads up not only sort of all the administrative aspects of managing all of the freelance photographers, and all the photographers, who end up sort of shooting for us, but also all of the photo editors. And there are about 10 of us who work on stories. And I just want to mention a few of them because, everyone has their specialty basically. And like Kathy Moran, for instance, is our expert when it comes to natural history, and she really manages our natural history coverage. And Dennis Dimmick is the person who's our expert on the environment. So any environmental stories, he would sort of direct that coverage. And then we have a whole slew of editors like Ken Geiger, Alice Greener, Susan Welchman, Sarah Lean, who work on geopolitics and culture, and I would sort of count myself amongst them. And then Todd James and Bill Douth that work on science, and Sadie Poirier works on adventure. So that kind of gives your audience a sense of who's working on what. And if you have a particular interest in one particular area, that's how you would find out who to approach, basically, if you're
Gotcha. And
interested.
is that all in the
So
masthead of the magazine as well? Those names?
it those names are all in the masthead. However, you would not know really in most cases who deals with what.
Gotcha.
So it's a little harder to parse out. Kind of have to you just have to replay the video that you watched.
Exactly.
So anyway,
And
so
is a title like the Nat Geo Traveler part of this same editing team, or is that a completely different operation?
no, Traveler and Kids and the the former adventure are all completely separate. We have completely separate staffs. So we call ourselves the Yellow Magazine in-house. So the Yellow Magazine is completely separate from all the rest. So,
This this image that Franz Lansing took, I guess it came out last year
mhm.
to the best of my recollection, and I remember all of this stuff online about how this was manipulated, and it brought back thoughts of the pyramids cover from 1982, which was in fact a
Mm,
manipulation, whereas this was not. Can you
that's
talk a little
correct.
bit about manipulation and the policy and what this particular image did for you guys?
Sure. I'll just say though, Ellen, that your sound level suddenly really jumped up, and I hope I'm not too loud.
Oh,
But
you're fine. I'll speak a little more quietly.
okay, no, that's fine. I just didn't know for your audience if that was a problem. Yes, it was fascinating to me actually that this image that Franz shot kicked up a huge firestorm in the web world, and it was really fun actually to watch all the back and forth. And in fact, they actually had Franz and me sort of do a little Q&A about it because so many people were raising questions. But what happened was that Franz was shooting at a very particular time of the morning. And he had come the day before and he noticed that if he waited until just the right moment, the sun would be illuminating this like 1,200-foot tall orange dune behind these petrified camel thorn trees. And but it hadn't quite hit the floor of the location where he was standing, which is Sosubli or Deadfly. And he's standing on a clay pan, which kind of reflects the blue of the sky. And so the floor, the ground, I should say, is in shadow, whereas the dune in the background is almost like on fire, with the morning sun. And you can see that the little bits of shrubbery and grass, the white grass is also sort of what's showing in the background. And so this is, what causes that really odd look because the trees are basically almost silhouetted and it just looks surreal. And a lot of people said, this must be a painting. So, but it's odd, Ellen. I should also mention there is actually more to the image on the right. I don't know if we're
Yeah, it might just be
um,
the aspect ratio of the
okay.
web
That's
software.
fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is not the entire image, but anyway, but yeah, so that's how that came about. So
I mean, talk about kind of iconic, jaw-dropping image though. I mean,
yeah, it was great because what was really difficult though about this story was that um, when what happened was that I had initially proposed this as a very small little landscape story on one particular park in Namibia on the coast called Namib Naukluft, and it turned out that we always take a long time to get stories started, or often it can take us months to get something off the ground because we have a huge inventory. We just have hundreds of stories going at any given time, and so you kind of wait your turn. And so by the time we started this story, the government of Namibia had decided to unite 4 or 5 different protected areas all along the coast so that their entire coast along the western side of Africa was going to be united into one huge super park. And so Franz was very excited, and he then expanded the coverage to go way beyond this one little park, but he didn't get that much more time. And so he still shot the whole thing, I think, in like 6 weeks, which is no time, to cover the whole edge of a country. And so he did an amazing job, I think, of getting some really memorable images. And I couldn't resist adding this one of these quiver trees at night under the starry sky. I just thought, two such opposite tree images from the same coverage. I thought it was really fun.
I remember being a kid and seeing some behind-the-scenes images of National Geographic and seeing all of the slides and rolls and rolls and rolls of slide film that people were shooting on. And for anyone who remembers shooting on Chrome, it's very sensitive to exposure, and you really can't shoot above about ISO 800. Whereas now with my Nikon D4, I can shoot at ISO 200,000. How has technology changed the images that you're seeing come across your desk?
It is really amazing because, you're looking at an image like this one, and there was another similar image Jim Richardson shot for a story we did on Tallgrass Prairie, where you could just see the entire sort of Milky Way behind the trees. And he had another shot in that story, which he tells me, and I believe him, would not have been possible for digital, which is a field full of fireflies, where you could actually see
Yeah.
a lot of the flowers and the sort of purple color of the flowers and the fireflies. It was pretty amazing. And so you do get situations like that, and you also get situations at the other end of the editorial spectrum where you have people who are, again, I think about that situation that Chenchi was shooting in outside of North Korea, where you don't want anyone to know that you're there, and you're shooting at very low light, just with available light, and you have a much longer window that you can continue to shoot and actually get something
Right.
that is usable. So
How often, just curiously, there's 10 editors working at the magazine, you're dealing on individual stories. How often do you see an image that's so amazing that you say, "Guys, you gotta come over here and look at this."
it's really hard to say because I have to admit, maybe I'm just too much of a soft touch, but I get excited about a lot of images. So I'll be editing and I'll think, oh, wow, this is incredible. So, I mean, there's always something in every story that really kind of blows me away. But there's the ones that really kind of, I don't know, over the course of a lifetime, over the course of a career, I don't know, maybe only, three or four a year.
Hmm.
It's hard to say, it's hard to say. So, and, when you were asking me before about numbers, we should say, one of the ways in which we're so fortunate and so different from most of the other, mainstream publications in the American media is that we are fortunate enough to give our photographers quite a bit of time and a lot of resources and support. And so we're talking about people going into the field, I would say usually from about anywhere from 4 to 12 weeks. We usually split that up into two trips. Maybe it might be one 4 week trip if it's just 4 weeks. But then if it's 12 weeks, you might have two 6 weeks trips, and the wildlife people often get quite a bit more time on top of that. They might have months because you just can't control that kind of shooting at all. But then, we might get 10,000 to 60,000 frames per story
It's
and have to
incredible.
boil that down,
Yeah.
to 18 images or 23 images or something. And then, luckily, our stories, I think, are probably anywhere between 12 to 28 pages is the usual average. And occasionally there'll be some blockbuster that goes on, or there might be something that's shorter, but generally it's sort of within that range.
So I love seeing these photographers are gods here because you just don't hear that much. You don't hear that
No,
anymore,
I
So
know.
that's
But
fantastic. Tell
but I
us.
was joking. I was joking with Lauren when we were talking about this. Yeah. So.
When there's a story where there's a writer assigned and there's a photographer assigned, what sort of pre-planning goes into that so that the right images are being captured, and what conversations are going on during the course of this 4 to 12 weeks to ensure that the types of images that everyone has in mind are the types of images that get delivered?
Well, this is one of the things that relates to the next bullet point too, because I also think that we're very fortunate in being able to spend so much time researching. And that's one reason it can sometimes take us quite a long time to get someone into the field is that, both the photographer and the editor will spend quite a lot of time delving into every aspect of a story and trying to figure out all the parameters and sort of where is the best place to get a particular kind of situation, what are the kinds of situations we need to construct the narrative. If we're assuming that we have a reader who knows nothing about the subject, how do we define that story for that person? And that's why we look for photographers who not only have, a fantastic eye and really, are street savvy and can handle themselves in any difficult situation. I mean, those are just givens. That's the baseline. But we also really need people who have a passionate curiosity, who are not afraid to really delve into sort of the intellectual and research side of things, because we need them to know as much as they can before they get out there. But we also need people who understand how to put together a story, because that's one way in which National Geographic is really different from almost any other magazine, is that we're really trying to tell entire stories. And it doesn't help us if a photographer can make these fantastic, memorable single images, but they can't put together, an entire narrative. We need somebody who can sort of track the entire arc of a story, and bring in all those components and bring in the variety and the changes in scale and all that kind of depth, that you really need to piece together something that's going to hold up.
I can't think
Mm.
of a single organization that I've heard of that involves the photographer in the actual edit anymore. So you actually are bringing photographers to have at least a partial say in the edit.
Yes, and that's actually my favorite aspect of this job, is to have that kind of intimacy with the photographer, because I learn so much from them. I mean, they're the most valuable asset that we have, because they're the one who goes into the field, and no matter how much I might do research in the office, they're going to get out there and find that things are completely different in certain respects. And so we respect that, and we understand the power of serendipity. And so when they come back, they're invested with so much knowledge that they can then pass back to me. And, it's in their work, it's sort of just inherent in their work. And so we love that, and they're very valuable, of course, to our researchers and to the people who are writing the captions. But in almost every case, unless I was going to say unless they're overseas, but to tell you the truth, I just had a photographer here from Turkey. I'm going to be bringing another photographer in from Cairo. So we bring them in some cases, both for what we call the halfway look or the interim look, and in other cases, in almost all cases, for the final show, because we want them to be able to work with us, sit next to us in front of the computer or in front of the projector, and edit it down to the selection of the final, 30 to 50 images that we're going to show to the editor. And then we want them to be able to narrate through it and actually present it, because they're the ones who have that sort of bone deep understanding of what we're looking at.
In the case of Franz, who's kind of walking around by himself, it seems like he was pretty self-contained. But if you're going on an expedition of Everest, or if you're doing more of a technical shoot, I assume that these photographers are bringing staff with them.
In almost every case, the photographer goes alone and will hire some kind of local support. Like he or she might hire someone who really understands the area, speaks the language, and can operate, as a guide or a fixer and a translator or a driver, whatever. We sort of try to put together whatever kind of support they need, but it's usually pretty lean. They don't usually go in with a team.
Hmm.
However, you definitely have exceptions. We do have people, especially people shooting either archaeology or some of these more monumental situations, where they're doing these tiny little artifacts in a museum or something. And remind me to talk more about archaeology, because if anybody's interested in shooting archaeology, we really need you. But those people are allowed to bring their assistants, and then a lot of the wildlife people really need assistance if
Yeah.
they're working, in remote areas, or if they're working underwater or something.
Tell us about this
Yes.
story by Greg Girard.
Yes. Well, we do a lot of environmental stories. So then you think, well, how are we going to try to tackle a story like this in a way that our readers haven't seen a million times before? Because we do so many stories like this. But, we all kind of understand how crucial China is in terms of, what they decide to do in terms of their energy usage is going to impact all of our lives down the line. Whether we're going to be able to breathe or not, or whether we're going to be able to have any resources left to power our electrical grids. So we thought, well, what can we do that's different? And so I do not remember now whether it was David Griffin or Kurt Muchler, which of our photo directors at the time actually hired Greg, but one of them suggested him because he's also a fine art photographer, and they knew that the deliberate way that he sees things would give this story a very different look from the more journalistic stories we had done on China before and some of the environmental stories. So, for instance, we had done a story with Bob Sasha on some of the environmental costs of China, and so he was very journalistic, and so we were looking for something very different. And so you can see just the way that Greg sees, and he was shooting larger format, actually a medium format, which was both color neg and color transparency.
Hmm.
And so that was really interesting too, to be working with someone who was still working with film, which was fun.
So
So,
that's
and here
really
you
at
see
the
it.
discretion of the photographer, what medium they want to use.
Almost always, because in most cases we feel that it's really up to the photographer and, really in concert with their photo editor to make the decision on what is the best medium that will represent this particular story. And so in this case, because we wanted that more artful look from Greg, he stuck to, even though he does shoot digital, of course, now, but he did stick to, the more old-fashioned medium. And so in the last frame, you saw a coal yard with a Buddha head that was actually left over from a gas station. It was sort of a good luck charm that was next door. And then he's also shot coal ash, sort of a landfill, which all the coal waste. And I just love how evocative this is. It just felt so desolate, like you were just in the middle of this sort of twilight zone. And it's all the waste from the power plant in the background.
Yeah.
So it gives you a sense of what they're up against.
So National Geographic has no staff photographers. Everything is commissioned.
It's a little misleading because what it is that Nick Nichols is on our staff. He's an executive editor. He's at a very high level. He as well as shooting stories, and he does some of our most memorable, kind of iconic stories, like on the redwoods. And right now he's shooting something on big cats. And so he's part of our brain trust, and he works at a very high level with the sort of executive team. And he's on staff. But we also have two photographers who are on staff in our studio, Mark Thiessen and Becky Hale, and they shoot for the entire society. But they shoot events here. They also shoot a lot of products in the studio. They shoot a lot of departments in the magazine. And Mark also shoots a number of feature stories as well. So, but everyone else is commissioned on a by-story basis. So it gives them more flexibility, to be able to do that.
So this first bullet point I found kind of fascinating. Half the stories, or roughly half the stories, conceived by the photographer and writers, and the rest done by
Hmm.
the actual staff. Tell us how that works.
Well, the whole proposal procedure is complicated, but basically anyone can submit a story idea at any time. And it just turns out that at least traditionally, and I don't know if this has shifted at all, this proportion, but traditionally about half the stories that get approved um, come from freelance contributors, both photographers and writers, and about half from of our staff, from any part of our staff actually. And it's a tricky process because for one thing, we're almost always working on some story that's related to anything that gets proposed, or we've already covered something that's related to something that's been proposed. So a lot of things just get knocked out because we've covered so much already, and because we just have hundreds of stories that are still in the pipeline, that people don't understand, they haven't been published yet, so they wouldn't know that we're working on something. So it's a tough thing, try to figure out what the editors will be attracted to and what they'll go for. It's tricky because on the one hand, we don't normally do the kind of stories that like Life magazine used to do, where they used to follow like one person and see these larger issues through the lens of one person's life. We tend to be a little bit more comprehensive than that, have a sort of a broader view. And a lot of our stories involve, geography and the whole sense of a person's world, as much as their own personal life. But that I think is the key to a lot of our stories is we try to give the context of the larger issues and the kind of community in which the person is living, as well as getting the most intimate sort of human moments and those emotional moments and, the kind of moments that people are going to remember, and that they're moved by. So,
Um, Lynn Johnson with another photo essay here. Tell us about this particular story.
well, this is a story on landmines. And one of the things that I was saying earlier about, stories, you had asked me a question when we were chatting earlier, Ellen, about approving stories that were popular or not popular. And
Yeah.
sometimes, the editors always keep in mind, what do our readers really want and what kinds of stories really interest them. So of course anything they think would be really popular with readers that they feel was within our arena of coverage, is something that they'll approve. But on the other hand, every once in a while, they'll do something that they feel, well, maybe it's tougher for readers. Maybe something on 21st century slavery, which was shot by Jodi Cobb, or something on radioactive nuclear waste, shot by Lynn Johnson. Maybe it's not something that readers are going to be initially drawn to as a subject, but we think it's important enough that we want people to really engage with it and to come to some kind of understanding with it. And I think Landmines is that kind of story. I think it's a tough story, but ultimately it was just so moving to me, at least. And Lynn Johnson was so committed in shooting it, and the writer Mark Jenkins was so committed in proposing the story and in reporting it. And I just was so glad that we were able to feature these kinds of issues and bring this kind of attention to it. And here you see a little 14-year-old boy who was injured in Burma and crossed over the border. He's here in a hospital in Thailand. And what I love about this picture is there's just a sense, I mean, the composition reminds me, with his body posture and everything, of some kind of classical painting. But the fact that she pulled back and got this whole frame, there's a sense, a little bit of isolation of the plight that he's facing, and that he will be facing. And I just found this a really evocative frame.
When you're looking at an image, or when you're doing like a portfolio review, are you thinking about
Mm-hmm.
things like, oh, rule of thirds, look at the this tension point here in the rule of thirds, or are you just like, this image moves me, and compositionally it just, it's working? Like, how technical do you get
Well,
about things like that?
I hate to say that I'm not technical enough in most cases. I should be much more aware of these kinds of things,
Hmm.
but honestly, I look at things very quickly. And when you think about it, if I have to go through 40,000 images, I'm really, just powering through just hundreds and hundreds of images, when I can. And so, things like light and composition just grab me immediately. And so I'm not stopping to think intellectually about it, but I do sometimes have to actually pull back a little bit and slow down and say, I need this content. Maybe this is not the greatest frame, compositionally, but I
Yeah.
need to make sure that I've got something like this in the mix. So,
Another photo by Lynn Johnson from the same story.
hmm hmm so this image I included because it was not published in the print edition, and I added it for the web gallery. And it was one of those images that, again, I felt was so powerful, and it just really spoke to me, but it was not as journalistic in many ways as the rest of her coverage, and it kind of stood out because he almost feels like he's against a backdrop or in a studio, which of course he's not. He's at his school, but because he's breaking through that fourth wall, he's making the eye contact, and it's more of a portrait. It didn't fit into the rhythm of the rest of the layout as well, and
Hmm.
so we weren't able to work it in, but it still felt so strong to me that I wanted to give it the exposure, and so we included it as a web edition, but it was not in the print
So you
edition.
will take for the
Mm-hmm.
magazine on a feature story 60,000 images
Mm-hmm.
and take it down to 20.
I'm just
Digital.
really, hmm
So, but
right,
on the web
right,
edition and the
essentially.
iPad, that gives you a larger edit. Has that sort of freed
Yes.
you up a little bit?
Yes, definitely. And I will say that I have been lucky enough that I've never had to go through 60,000 frames on one story. I think the most I've ever had, it was something like 53,000 for Steve McCurry on a story on Tibet
Whew.
many years ago. But that was when he was still shooting film. But yeah, I think normally, you know, what happens is that we do have room and a little more latitude with iPad and the web gallery to add a few more images, maybe just, three or four more, maybe, five or six more. But there's something about the iPad. It's the designers feel a little bit more of a empowerment, I think, to maybe play around with the iPad edition.
Hmm.
So sometimes I think, people who have a subscription, can see both the iPad edition and the print edition. And sometimes it's interesting to compare because sometimes they almost follow, step by step, almost exactly the same. But every once in a while, there's something that's really different and much more playful. And it's funny because there's something about that iPad approach that, the tactile contact and the interaction. Sometimes I think it frees people up to be just a little bit more playful and not necessarily as logical even sometimes, but it's fun. It's fun. I've got a story on the Roman Empire coming out in the fall, and the layout on the iPad is completely different and just, much more sort of lighthearted. So,
So this is the point where all the questions that we've been getting on, how do I submit to the magazine? This is the most important slide, and
right,
and let me
right.
start by saying to the audience, this is the first time that I've heard a photo editor say that a referral is so important. And when we were talking in the pre-brief yesterday, Elizabeth, you said there's so much riding on a commissioned story that you really have to have a level of confidence. So it's not the kind of thing where somebody emails you out of the blue and all of a sudden they have an assignment. It really is sort of building a relationship of many years potentially, or building a reputation before you would use somebody.
Yes, yes. I don't at all want to be discouraging
Oops.
because
Let me
I
interrupt you.
love
We're getting that weird
sure,
audio thing
sure.
again.
Oh, okay, okay. Should I just unplug my phone for a second?
Sorry, folks. Every 30 minutes she gets this weird audio thing going on, so we just restart her.
Is this any better at all,
That's
Alan?
better,
Or
yeah.
okay, I just replugged the microphone. So, um, yes, I don't want to discourage people at all because we always need new talent and we love that fresh blood. Although I have to say we have such an incredibly stellar, stable of regular contributors that it's really hard to bring in new talent because in essence you're almost knocking out somebody else. But yes, I would say that most of the people who've come to us most recently are people who already have a very, very strong reputation. We've seen their work at a photo festival like Perpignan, or we've seen their work win at World Press, or we've seen them be published in many other magazines. And so those are the kind of people, that automatically sort of are right at our doorstep and we know they're ready. We know we can trust them. We know we're not going to lose, this huge investment on a story. And so those are the people who are the natural kind of newcomers to the geographic. But on the other hand, as we were saying, if you are really good at something that we need. And I mentioned archaeology as one example because that's someplace we're really hurting. We have some people who are fantastic at it. Like, for instance, Robert Clark is really excellent at pulling off those kinds of stories. But it's very hard because if you think about archaeology, you need somebody who has a passion for ancient civilizations, somebody who has the lighting skills to do really exquisite lighting on these artifacts, which could be these tiny little things, and sort of bring out the mystique of these people who lived, hundreds of years ago. And then you need someone who can do very evocative landscapes, so they have to be able to get the full panorama of an overview. And then you have somebody who has to understand some of the legal complexities of shooting in museums. So it's a lot to ask of any one person. And so it's hard. But, if you have something like that, you move right to the head of the line as far as I'm concerned.
Hmm.
But yeah, if you have had exposure at photo festivals, if I've seen you speak, if your work has been featured on a lot of blogs, if we do portfolio reviews quite a lot, and I'll just start mentioning some of these names too as resources for people. For instance, you saw that I did portfolio reviews at Santa Fe and at Eddie Adams at Palm Springs. um, any of those places are really great places to sign up for. Or Photo Week DC is something here in Washington, NYC Photo Weeks, Photo Works in New York, and the photo festivals. I think people don't go see enough photography. We were
Yeah.
talking about this, Alan, but you guys are so lucky in this day and age. You can go to so many different websites. You can go to, the New York Times Lens blog. You can go to Time Lightbox or the New Yorker. You can go to the websites for Magnum or for Seven, for Institute, all the photo agencies. You can see all the photo books on Photo Eye in Santa Fe. You can look at you can sign up for workshops with Photo Visura, which is in Vermont, which is someplace that I might actually be teaching later this month. There are just so many different options. Festivals like Look 3 or Perpignan or Palm Springs, contests. You can look at World Press, what's been winning at POY, Pictures of the Year. I mean, there are just so many places. And I feel like that's the thing I really want to leave you with is shoot as much as you can to sort of develop those muscles, but look as much as you can too. Go to galleries, go to museums. There are so many amazing places, and that's sort of what I try to tell people more than anything. But yes, as far as what I look for, dedication to long-term projects, we see when people have been working on something for a long time. And whether or not it's something that is right for us, some of my colleagues are really great at that. Like Sarah Lean, saw Aaron Huey's work on Pine Ridge. Another colleague of mine, Susan Welchman, saw work Stephanie Sinclair was doing on polygamy and on child brides. I mean, we bring some of these projects in and they get published and they're fantastic. And that kind of shows us, that you have the track record to shoot on assignment for us as well. And then, of course, if you have multimedia skills, that's very helpful. And as you said, Alan, anything with a referral, if somebody I know and trust sends you to me and you send me an email and in the subject line of the email you say so and so suggested I contact you, then I'm going to open that email. Whereas the other dozens of email I get a day which are promotional, I may just completely skip over because
Yeah.
I just don't have time. So
So how many new photographers does the magazine use during the course of a year, just so we can acclimate our audience?
if we have, say we have like, 75 to 80 stories we run a year, out of that we might only have 3 or 4 new photographers, and 4 is a lot, I'd say, during one year. And I'm actually working with a number of new people now, which is exciting, but it's a lot more work in a way because you have to orient them into the culture and you have to try to, help them understand what's required of them. But on the other hand, it's rewarding to work with someone new and to bring them in and to, to see them, sort of the light dawning in their eyes as they understand, what it's really like to be a National Geographic photographer.
And you did mention some of the new photographers that you brought in, people like Stephanie Sinclair, and I think yesterday you mentioned Paolo Pellegrin. And these guys they're not recent graduates. They've literally been around shooting these stories for 15 years, winning major
Right.
awards.
Right. Our photo directors, Kurt Muchler and his predecessor, David Griffin, they brought in some of these people who were just at the absolute peak of the photojournalism field, people like Paolo or Lindsay Addario, people who, Eugene Richards. I mean, you can't get any better than that.
Yeah.
And they've been shooting for other people, for decades, but they're new to us. And so it gives people a little bit of an idea of who they're competing against when they try to get access. On the other hand, we do offer multimedia internships, which is a great way to try to break in also. If you're a college student, you might want to look into that, or a recent graduate. We do have multimedia internships, and one of our previous interns, Kitra Kahana, was encouraged by one of my colleagues, Todd James, and she actually ended up doing a cover story for us on the teen brain. So, Kurt is very open to all kinds of photographers at every level. It's just that, he has a real understanding of what it takes to do one of our stories. And so, so it's a very tiny, tiny percentage of people who want to shoot for us who are able to actually get those in-depth assignments.
And because you are kind of in the business of storytelling, um, is it accurate to say that the photographers you hire really have this kind of photojournalism background versus being a portrait photographer or a travel photographer?
I would say that's primarily true. I mean, there are definitely exceptions because we do have people who are more oriented to fine art, and they are great for sort of a change of pace. And we also have people who are really great at lighting, and we need that, as I mentioned before, for some of these more conceptual stories or stories requiring artifact lighting, but mostly what we need, whether it's natural history or archaeology or anything, we need people who understand how a story is woven together because at our essence, we are all about storytelling, and that's really what National Geographic's identity is.
So just to boil it down, if people
Uh-huh.
wanted to show you images,
Can we
emailing,
continue, Eleanor? Isn't it 5 o'clock?
yeah, we'll do like another minute.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
Um,
Sorry.
I guess
Uh,
if they email is probably not the best way to get to you. It's more like meet me at a photo festival, sign up for a portfolio review, establish that you are someone in dedicated to the kind of the craft of storytelling and whatnot.
it's hard to advise people to do that kind of thing because it's almost like saying, well, you have to become a great photographer first, and I feel like that's unfair to give that kind of advice.
Right.
I mean, I would just say follow your own passion and that we really respect people who, pursue these more in-depth projects and who have their own obsessions, and if you are good enough at that, we will come after you, and you're positioning yourself to be noticed by us. So that's probably, the purest way to reach that. But of course, if you want to send us promos, that's fine. And as I was saying to Lauren, to tell you the truth, I think print and mail, promotions, snail mail promotions, have a very slight advantage in that I look at them from when I walk from the mailbox to my office and I recycle them. In between there, I'm looking at those printed promotional pieces.
Hmm.
Whereas if something comes into my email, and if I don't have time that day, I may not see it at all.
Yeah.
So,
So
yeah.
two more images, 10 seconds apiece. Here's Paul Nichols,
Okay.
polar bear.
Yes, that's Svalbard. And again, how do you show people what we're losing with global warming? Paul is one of the masters of wildlife, and he just caught that moment. And the funny thing is that I saw two other photographers who were shooting right next to him on a ship, and believe me, he was the only one who got it. So that was great. And why don't you go on to the next one, Ellen?
Yeah.
Because I love this. This is David Duvalier shooting nudibranchs, which are these sea slugs that don't have their shell, and they are just these exquisite little like pieces of petit four. I mean, they're like cake icing or something. And he shot this all underwater, one at a time. This is a composite shot. I'm just grouping four of them together so that the audience can get a sense of the variety. But to be able to see these creatures normally, they're just at the bottom of the ocean. You don't see any color. They're just blending into the bottom of the ocean. And he created a tiny little studio down there, picked them up, put them against this background, a white background, shot them and put them right back. Nobody was harmed. They all survived.
Amazing.
And this is to me is the essence of what it's like to show people something they've never seen before. And I just love that, to create that sense of wonder. That to me is really sort of the essence of what we're all about. So I love
So
that.
everyone who's allowed their National Geographic subscriptions to lapse over the past decade or so, I think there's probably good reason to start it up again. I think I'm going to have to do that as well. We used to have it every month when I was a kid. But Elizabeth, thank you so much for all of the information and sharing your time. This is really, really fantastic. to hear from you
Thank
and
you,
talk to you.
Alan. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you for letting me wander on. I really appreciate it. It's been great fun.
We do these webinars with photo editors probably about once a month. I also want to let the audience know about a photo conference that we're throwing together. Unlike any photo conference you've ever seen, we're really trying to take technology, business, culture, and photography and put them all together. So we have people from Facebook, Google, Tumblr, Blurb, a bunch of photographers like Joe McNally, Corey Rich, and Robert Seal. So to get for more information on that, photoshelter.com/luminance. But thank you to everyone who joined us today. The recording of this will be available tomorrow, and I hope to see you again. And thank you to Elizabeth once again. Bye bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
The organizer has ended the session, and this call will be disconnected. Goodbye.